Hi class, today we're going to look at random numbers and we're going to create a small game that will require player 1 and player 2 to input two numbers between the number of 0 and 100 and guess if their number is the closest to a random number that is generated here. Well, the player's number will be displayed right here in this label. So we got to use local and global variables last class, and today we're going to look at random numbers. So to use random numbers, it's kind of the way we write the function for random numbers, it's kind of archaic. It uses a lot of words we don't use, but it's just we have to memorize it. So we're getting the integer value of an arg4 random, so a random number uniformly distributed of 100. So since in computer programming 0 is viewed as a number, everything would go from 0 to 99 in this case. So if we would like to get a random number between 1 and 100, we have to add a 1 here. And this is another example. This one would get you 0 to 24 as a random number, plus 11, it would be 11 to 35. So what we're going to do is create an app with two players inputting their number, and whoever is closest to that number wins. So let's try. So what I've done here, I've created one label for my title, one label with a 0 for my my number, that is my random number that's going to be displayed to the user, two static labels, two text fields with a placeholder of 0 to 100, a label that has winner and a semicolon and just a blank here that will display player 1 or player 2, and finally a button. I have not coded anything, so we can start by creating our connections. So this first one I'm going to call label random. The text fields I'm going to call text player 1. And this one txt player 2. Let's call this label result as an outlet. And finally, our button we can call btn results as an action and UI button. Great. So whenever we click this play button, we have to get a variable that holds the information for player 1, get a variable that holds the information for player 2, get a random number, and use an if-else statement to get a result for which number of these two is closest to this one. So let's start. So we can start by declaring our variables outside the button. This is not obligatory, but we don't want the yellow error symbol that we have not declared variables, so we can start creating here our variables. I'm going to call variable player 1, and it's going to be an integer equal to 0 right now, a variable for player 2 equal to 0, and a var for my random number, which I'm also going to make equal to 0. I'm just declaring them here. You don't have to, but it's common courtesy here in programming. So in our button, we have to change player 1 equal to the integer of whatever the user inputted in txt player 1 dot text. Player 2 will be equal to the integer of txt player 2 dot text. Then we're gonna create a random number. So random num will be equal to the integer of arg4 underscore uniform 100 plus 1. Plus 1 because it to be from 1 to 100, this one. So we have an error here. Oh, there we go. So random num oh, we forgot arc for random it's called. Let's see if that works. I think it did. Okay, so we have our three numbers, player 1, player 2, and our random number. All that's left is changing our label random dot text equal to the string of random num, whatever random number was created here, and check to see how to change this label, who won. So let's say, for example, that player 1 inputted a 10 and player 2 a 100. So if the random number were 80, then player 2 would win. How do we know that? Because we would use the equation random number 80 minus 100, but we can use something called absolute values, which is we just want the absolute difference. We don't care if it's positive or negative between these two numbers or these two numbers. So what we can do is if player 1 minus random number is greater than, so if this is greater than player 2 minus random number. However, let's say player 1, if player 1 is 20 and random number is 80, then this would be minus 60. And I don't want to compare minus 60 because minus 60 is less than what player 2 has, which is an 80 and random number, sorry, 100 and random number 80, so 20. Then player 2 would be winning this if statement. So I want to use something called ABS, absolute value. What we're saying here in ABS is if player 1 chose a 20 and random number is an 80, then this would be negative 60 and ABS would turn this into a positive, so 60. And if player 2 inputted an 80 and random number, an 100 and random number equals 80, then we also have to put ABS here. And if sorry, we have, oh, we're just missing our condition. So if this difference between these two numbers is greater than these two difference, then in this case we want the less difference. Then player, we're going to change label result dot text, and we're going to change it to winner player 2. Why player 2? Because player 2 has the least difference between random number and its number. Else, or else if, and we can, well, I'm going to type it out. Else ABS player 1 minus random number is greater than ABS of player 2 minus random number. So we're saying the opposite in this one. So what would happen if the opposite? Then player 1 would win. So label results dot text winner player 1. And I'm adding another else, that if it's not one of these two, then it's going to be a tie. So else, open brackets, label results dot text winner tie. So to recap, we're getting the difference between these two numbers, and I don't care if it's positive or negative. If the difference is greater than the difference between player 2 and random number, then player 2 wins, because the player with the least difference between random number is the one who wins. So in this else if, I'm doing the opposite, and if it's not any of these, then it has to be a tie. The difference has to be the same. Okay, I think we're done for our button. Let's try and see if this works.